Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Very good. Thank you, Roger, for the answer. Very good. Thank you, Tobias. So I wish you a warm welcome to this Matchpoint webinar. Today, I would like to talk to you about enterprise collaboration, SharePoint 2013, and Matchpoint. Maybe to start some simple rules in order to get this webinar smooth and easy to understand for everyone. Acoustically, I would like to ask you to mute your microphone, those who did not already do so, in order to avoid background noises. And if you have questions, I'd like to answer these questions in the end of the webinar. We will have time to answer questions. And the easiest way to do that is if you use the chat, then I will answer the questions. And if it should happen that you can't hear me anymore all of a sudden, just also use the chat. It is always open on my screen, so I keep an eye on it and try to catch up again if the audio connection should break. Shouldn't happen, but it could happen. Okay. I hope everybody can also see the slide deck I shared on the screen. I have one part of the webinar based on slides, giving you some background information, also about concepts that we use in Matchpoint to build collaboration applications. And the other part of the webinar will be based on a first look at Matchpoint on SharePoint 2013 in a quite simple yet powerful solution in the enterprise collaboration area. So after a short introduction of how we feel people might want to work in the future, I would like to give you some insight in our concepts and also to show you how we build applications from a methodical point of view. And in the end of the webinar, I will also use some words regarding architecture, which is a very important topic, especially in large organizations where amount of data, amount of users, amount of, for example, team rooms and other objects are high and require a robust architecture in SharePoint. So the first question that we asked ourselves was, how do people actually collaborate? And if you look at various organizations and large enterprises, we can see, and also our experience shows us that people need new tools to collaborate in a more efficient way, but they don't really know how to implement these tools and where to go, because most of them have worked on the file server for the last 20 years, and to many people it's quite difficult to imagine that there could be something different and that there could be something better and more also fun to work with. And of course, other questions arise when you ask this question, because how can we, for example, help organizations to have a more interactive way of working together, especially if people are not sitting in the same room and working at the same time. Also, how can we improve access to content, and how can we also improve providing this content on various devices, also outside of the office, and how does this match with existing corporate structures and processes? I mean, you can't just go and do anything you like in a large organization. You still have to behave and fulfill certain rules. So our idea is that working in an organization should be as easy as it is today on the internet. And I think that's also like a legitimate requirement that your users, your employees, if you are an employer, might have, because when they go home in the evening, they switch on their tablet and they are connected to all their friends. They have very easy access to information. They have nice, easy to use web interfaces. and they can basically do what they want to do in a very efficient way, because information is coming to them. They don't need to go into all these different data silos that gives them a partial view on what they have to do. Like this is unfortunately still today often the case in an organization. So having this organizational look now, what do these people do when they work in an organization? Well, many of them create content, and in a traditional way, they use a classical hierarchical system to store this content. For example, file server, or also other document management systems that are based on folder hierarchies where content is located in a specific folder. Well, while this is quite easy to use, and everybody knows it, as I mentioned, they use it for the last couple of years or even decades now, this technology is kind of a little bit outdated and also leads to problems, because the structures you use, they are historically grown and they're not very well organized. This is, of course, a problem for findability. And also what is very important, the context is missing. You only have the content and a little bit of context given by the folder name, for example. So you might know that a document has been stored in a customer folder, or in a product folder, or in a project folder. But what is lacking is all this global, call it 360 view on various contexts that have to do with the content that you're looking for. And on the other hand, you also might lose agility when you stick too long with these technologies. Also, if you would like to improve and support processes, this is not the way to go, because on your file server you only have a document store. It's not a tool for supporting electronic processes. And also, of course, many organizations have a multi-device strategy, multi-channel strategy to communicate with their employees today, and that's also very difficult if you would like to access your file server from your iPhone. So another way of doing it is, of course, using a platform like SharePoint and work with collaborative containers where people can meet and work together. So I have some examples here of typical collaboration workspaces, like team spaces, project spaces, and so on. And the idea here is, of course, that a team can work in a space that is designed for the work they have to do. So it's much more than a folder. It's technically speaking, in SharePoint, it's a site or a site collection where you can, of course, provide many different tools. The advantage of this is, of course, also that teams that do not belong together in the organization also can very easily define such a space for themselves, invite other people, and meet. So, like, for example, a board of an organization can define a board meeting space and have all the things they need to do in some space. So that are really basics. And now what happens to the content? We believe that if you use SharePoint as a platform for collaboration, you should use these spaces as a structure to organize your content. Because SharePoint cannot be used as just a large black hole where you throw everything in without structure, and then could be able to find everything based on search. It would be an ideal world, but based on, for example, performance criteria, also permissions management and other criteria, this is not possible. So you need some kind of structure to organize your content. Now the problem with structure is always the same. Physical structure is not necessarily corresponding to the view a user might have when he's looking for content. That's one of the old problems with file servers. If you don't know the structure, you won't find anything. Now in SharePoint, as you know, you have metadata to provide different views. So what we do, we say if we can define metadata not only for the content, but also for the structure, it is much easier to find content that is inside the structure and provide a different view of this content. So Matchpoint does exactly this. It is one important concept. It's the concept of site and site collection structural metadata. So we apply tags in, for example, in this way as you see it here, for the name of the team, the name of the project, or other important information, to the containers where you store your information. And we also use profile information about people who are accessing this information. So, for example, users with a user profile give us information about their organizational unit, about their roles, about their function in the organization. And by matching these two criteria with our technology, we then can personalize the content that is inside the containers. So, of course, the normal metadata that you would apply to, for example, documents and other content in SharePoint still is used, because it delivers additional valuable information that is based not on the container but on the content itself, like, for example, the document type. What Matchpoint then does is it accumulates all this information about the container, about the user, about the role, about the content, and inherits it to the content. So in the end of the day, the user is still interested in content, so we inherit metadata, and of course, by creating and using relations, Matchpoint is able of managing relational metadata as well, we can add a lot more. So for example, from the user profile, we can say that Ross Brown is belonging to the marketing unit, so then since he's involved in the project X, this project necessarily does have something to do with marketing, and at least some connection. Also, we can pull from other sources, who is the project manager, for example, J.P. Miller, what is the budget, and what is the status of the project. This we can also pull out of third-party systems by using our connector framework. So this said, if now a user is looking for information, you can just ask, please give me, for example, all HR forms. Now, based on search, and here we use the fast search, and based on metadata filtering, Matchpoint is pulling together and aggregating this information, and this can be done across the whole SharePoint farm, and not only within one site collection, and can provide this information to the user. So whatever your request might be, based on the rules you define on your view or on your search, you can exactly pull out the amount of data that you're interested in out of the index. And since all these parameters you have seen before can be provided as metadata with Matchpoint, you only need the index as the only source. And that's a big difference to other scenarios where you also would need, for example, the site directory, because usually the site information is not completely in the index, or if you, for example, use the role information, it would be a permission object that you would have to check, and since Matchpoint is also creating metadata based on roles, also this information can be in the index and can be filtered by pure metadata filtering. So we are drastically simplifying the way how to deliver data, how to aggregate data, and also, of course, how to personalize this data based on the needs of each and every user. On the other hand, we have seen that by using inheritance and using other metadata management technologies, we can provide a guarantee that metadata quality on the content is high and that the metadata is there, because we don't let the users do the tagging anymore. You will have less mistakes, you will have, of course, more complete metadata, and this is, of course, a much better basis for a good index than if you rely on user-based tagging. We still can do user-based tagging as an addition, because some information is only in the user's head and cannot be provided automatically. That's completely clear, but it is not the basis for really good metadata quality. So with this approach, we basically combine the structure that SharePoint delivers with metadata that is managed by Matchpoint. Of course, you can also use SharePoint metadata from the first store. You can also use just normal site columns, which also can contain metadata. and combined it. It is all a question of what exactly do you want to do. Matchpoint metadata, maybe as a rule of thumb, is highly managed metadata, which means that it comes from sources that are managed, like for example your ERP and CRM system, and is directly delivered into SharePoint and can be applied based on rules, based on operations, based on workflows, and so on. While we see SharePoint metadata as rather user-driven metadata, like for example the terms from the term store that are applied manually by the user to content. So based on this, we use the Matchpoint components, which are our web parts and services, to build an application. And of course, we also use in the collaboration space line of business integration provided by the Matchpoint connector framework to create context. That's a very important aspect of our approach, because in your line of business applications, like this CRM or the ERP, you already have a lot of very important business context that you absolutely need in SharePoint to really give the content a sense, in the meaning of that the user knows in what business context this content can be seen. So this all together we call loose coupling. Why do we use this term? I will explain to you a little bit later a little more on this concept, but basically we want to have a coupling between line of business and SharePoint, between content and structure, between user and content and information that is not hardwired, because things change all the time. So customer names, for example, that come from the CRM might change. And if you do a hardwired connection between SharePoint and your CRM, you would constantly have change projects to take care of these changes. By using loose coupling, we can make sure that technology updates itself, and also the content that is delivered through this technology, in this case the metadata, is constantly updated, and we can ensure that sustainability of such a solution is by far higher than if you would do this just by implementing a hardwired interface between the two systems. So the advantages of this approach is, as I already mentioned, you can create context in SharePoint. That is very important. This, of course, increases findability because people don't have to look for pure content information any longer, but they can also combine their search criteria with context criteria. For example, it's much easier to find a document if you know the customer name to which the document belongs than if you have to guess what could be written inside the text of the document to find it. We also manage the solutions by implementing governance based on this concept. So all our governance tools that we provide are purely metadata based. And of course, that's another very important factor if you look at collaboration from an enterprise view. Scalability is a problem. If you look at the architecture that SharePoint provides today, which in 2013, with the limitations of concepts that break at the site collection level, for example, the permissions groups that are not global, or for example, the possibility to use metadata navigation is limited to site collection, and also other concepts that should be global are not global. That means that if you have an environment that is scaled out across a lot of site collections, probably thousands of site collections, stored in various databases, you get a management overhead that is too big to be handled. And Matchpoint, by providing technology that is cross-site collection and even cross-web application, can mitigate these problems and reduce the amount of maintenance, even in a very, very large environment. So, on the other hand, on the more business-oriented side, maybe, this was the technically oriented side to the left, we can personalize content, we can create views that are completely parameterized and based on user properties, for example, like the role, like the organizational unit, and so on, and also a combination of various parameters. We can deliver information through various channels and also through channels that are depending on other devices than your laptop or computer. So after this introduction, which hopefully gives you a little insight in our ideas, I would like to show you a couple of principles and benefits regarding the agility and efficiency, also the amount of control and governance you have in such an environment, and scalability and architecture that Matchpoint provides. So first of all, Matchpoint is about mass customization, which means that seen from a collaboration perspective, you have many similar applications that you would like to provide. For example, a team room, a project room, an event room, a board room. As you can easily see, all these topics are could be derived from a case management concept, because you are always working on kind of cases, and you have always instances of an object that is template-based, in this case, the SharePoint site. So what we do is we provide components and services that let you define these base components for various types of collaboration and applications, and then, based on these, do configurations to take care of the various flavors of these components. That means that you have a high degree of reuse. If you have built one application, you can very easily copy this application, change the configuration, and also on a lower level, for example, if you have one template for one type of workspace, you can very easily create a second template for another type of workspace. That's one important concept. And the other concept is that our components that we provide, they are derived from a processual analysis that we have done on collaboration processes. So we have analyzed any kind of process that might be useful to support with SharePoint, like, for example, a project or any kind of other collaboration where people have to work together. And we have asked ourselves, what components do you need to fully support this process? As you can see here in the middle, there are also forms and workflows. For the workflow, which usually in a process is almost a synonym to process, in our view, is only one part of the way on how to support collaborative process. Because many parts of a process in a collaboration environment cannot be defined in a workflow because they are undefined, and there is no order which is exactly the same every time you run the process. But you need to be much more flexible in organizing your data, in visualizing, in finding and aggregating, in reusing, in modifying. So I think it's in the nature of SharePoint to provide the basics of these tools, but we enhance them by providing components that are really specialized on collaboration scenarios. Of course, again, the context is important, and also the governance. We often see it that customers try to run SharePoint out of the box and just provide a collaboration environment to their users, and they give them a lot of freedom, so people start creating sites, and they forget to think about what they have to do with these sites once they are in use, once they are not used anymore, and so on. Which leads to the problem that IT does not know what content is outdated, what content can be deleted, what content has to be archived, for example, which leads to an ever-growing SharePoint environment. If you think about governance, I think if you have the right tools, you can avoid this and guarantee that IT stays in control, even though your employees have a lot of flexibility on run the system on their own. So this concept of loose coupling, I would like to explain this a little bit more in detail. What you see here, I'm sorry that the labels are in German here, but I hope everybody is understanding a little bit of German, and many words are English anyway. So what we think is a good approach, also in collaboration, is something that we have taken as an idea from classical intranet and applied to the collaboration space. So based on the idea that many people create content in such an environment, we have defined that for each type of task or for each kind of process, we would like to be able to provide a good environment to create content. So for example, if you are an author for news, you have a news application in SharePoint. If you are responsible for forms, you have a forms application. If you are responsible for a project, you have a project team room, and so on. So we would like to have a flexible layer of applications that are in fact also technically spoken SharePoint applications. In these applications, we provide the tools to all these people you see down here to create content. Now, these people are not necessarily those who look at this content. And those who look at it are the normal information worker that need this information that others have created. And they have a profile, so they are working in an organization, they have a role, they speak a language, they might have interests that they also can provide, for example, profile. Now, what happens in this approach here is that you build an intranet or any other application for these users, and you search for leveraging this
number 4
that is relevant to the user. So what Matchpoint provides here is we provide personalization of the information layer by using dynamic filtering and search-based displays. And on the application layer, we provide collaboration tools, all the components to build business applications, to support processes, to provide information governance and context generation. And down on the platform layer, Matchpoint is providing provisioning tools, for example, to provision sites and site collections, application governance tools, the integration of data sources and line of business systems, as well as configuration and deployment management tools. So, this said, I think it is understandable that this concept can lead to a higher agility, where users can themselves provision the objects they need in the collaboration environment, like the sites, for example. And on the other hand, you gain a lot of control, because the control is in the background and is uncoupled from what the user sees. On the other hand, you also have a good impact on scalability and architecture, because you gain an independence between physical structure and display layer. Since all these applications you have seen in the slides here, they have nothing to do anymore physically with the display you set up for your users. So now, what are typical implementations of this concept, and what kind of applications can you build with this? I would like to give you some ideas first, how to build these applications, and also to show you an application we have built with SharePoint 2013 based on this concept. So the idea is that you use the concept plus the tools plus the components that Matchpoint provides to do something like cookie cutting. You have a shape or a template, and with this template, and by slightly modifying it, you build a lot of applications in a very short time. So to start with, I would like to switch to the demo environment. Let me just share the other application. Just a second. Okay, so now should be able to see the SharePoint environment. Just refreshing the screen in case it is gone to sleep. But what you see here is kind of an overview page that displays various workspaces from a collaboration environment. So you have communities, you have team rooms, you have projects, and you could of course have a lot more. They are all template-based, and you can create these from here. If you click on Create New, you get a simple form. As a user, I can say I would like to create a new community. I can invite people based on the Active Directory, and then the site creation process is started. So this little example is already using Matchpoint components. What you have just seen was a Matchpoint form, and what is happening now is a Matchpoint provisioning workflow, and the site, as you have seen here in this URL, has been created. And as you also might have noticed, the user didn't have to indicate where the site is stored. The user didn't have to indicate the name of the URL. It's a generic URL. The user did not have to think about anything else, not about permissions, not about giving any other information regarding the site, and the site has been created. It's there now. So if you open it, you see it's based on a normal community template provided by SharePoint. I did not do my own template for the demo, so I just used a site definition from SharePoint and built the Matchpoint part around it. Now, going back to the first page, you see that the new site is displayed here. So what you see here in this list is the search result. We have defined this view here to be a search that is querying all the sites of a given type, namely those types that you can see here. And then it's personalizing the site on the role I have in the site. So if I am the community leader, or if I am, for example, the project manager, I can see this site here. And if I don't have a role in the site, I won't see it. I can then switch the view, of course, to a more expanded one with less restrictive rules, and make other sites visible that might also be of interest for me. Below, you see content and tasks aggregated across sites, and of course, this is not only working within one site collection, but across site collections and across web applications. So you have a display that is capable of aggregating data across your whole SharePoint farm. And if I go back to my one of my sites here, that's another one I created before. You see here this governance tab. If I look a little bit in detail into this governance tab, I find that I'm provisioning the site. Matchpoint has also initiated a couple of further information and metadata regarding my site governance. So I have defined that community sites should be per default internal. Then I also have defined that a normal self-site provisioning process is used and that no approval is required to open such a site. For the decommissioning, I defined that the site will be deleted without archiving. And I also have a review process, and I defined that the review has to be done every 6 months. So these are properties that are also included in the Matchpoint site template. And that can, of course, be completely generic. So you can add additional parameters, or you can change all those parameters. And you can even do this after you have already created hundreds or thousands of sites, because this configuration is a central one, which means that if I, for example, add an additional access level, or if I add an additional provisioning process, it will be available to all existing sites as well without re-provisioning the site. So Here you see one of these metadata-based concepts for governance. We have used exactly the same idea also for content targeting. So here we have, for example, content targeting based on priority, and I can now add as an administrator additional criteria to target the content of this site. Now I click Save. It is already done. And also on the site itself, you might have noticed that we have some topical information here to the right, and these are also available to the user. Of course, the governance is not available to a normal end user. But here I can, for example, say this site has to do with a certain customer, and it has to do with a certain product. It has to do with a country or a location, and it has to do with, for example, human resources. Now, these properties here, they are also applied to the site or the site collection. Now, if I create a content in this site, for example, a new discussion, it will automatically inherit this information. So you see here that some of the information is already there. And the rules, whether one of these categories is inherited or not, you see that not all categories have been inherited. They are configurable. So in this case, I said that every new discussion should automatically belong to the community site itself. Of course, it has a content classification. In this case, it's a discussion, and all the governance information is important because it also applies to content and not only to the site. So I can, for example, generate a list of documents across all my collaboration sites that have not been reviewed for the last 6 months and present this to the user. Of course, I could also have to find, and I think in a normal scenario, I would have that also the information I just entered regarding customer processes and so on is inherited, because this is, of course, very, very useful and can be used for personal information of the content. Now, on the top level, going back again, I can, of course, also surface this information. For example, in this view here, I can easily, by entering the Matchpoint configuration console, I can, for example, search for my group list configuration and enter the configuration and say I would like to see also the tag column with the customer information. I select the right tag. I want it to be sortable and filterable, and I say this is my customer column, and in my two views I have defined before my groups and all groups. I just add it. And I save the configuration, go back to the page, do a refresh, and of course I did not apply any customers to the other sites, but here you see the customer I applied to this site is already here. This is also based on central configuration. So what you have seen here before is the unified configuration interface that Matchpoint provides. And I think all those who have worked with Matchpoint before will recognize it. It has not changed since SharePoint 2010. Maybe we have some new items, and also we have some new things you can do, but that's not the topic of today. But basically, it just works like this. And that's also one of course, the major strength of Matchpoint, because it does not only work like before for the administrator, it also provides the same functionalities than on 2010, which means that your solution is still well. Okay. I go back to my slides. So how did we proceed to implement this little application? This is a way of how you could do this, because I think in the bottom, in every collaborative process, you have some kind of process definition. Sometimes it is a very well-defined process, sometimes it is not very well-defined process. But if you at least have some indications what is important in the process, I think you should base yourself on this. So you could start with a little analysis of what actions are important, what roles are important, what inputs and outputs, like for example in a project, what deliverables do you have, what phases do you have, and what are the relations between these entities. The principle here is not to go and start with the maximum of definition, but with the minimum, and that makes you much more agile and also guarantees that you will not end up in a never-ending process definition project. So we say the only things we need are a couple of single parameters that we can use then to define the process in the site. So the second step is to define the entities, because a process is something from the real world, and now you have to translate it into something in SharePoint. So, for example, you could say the actions in my process will be tasks in SharePoint, or the phases in my process will also be phases in SharePoint that I define with an object as a parameter for the task, like a metadata on the task to which phase the task belongs. The outputs, for example, like a form, could become templates because you need something to create it output with, and it's of course very useful if you can provide the user inside the collaborative workspace with the corresponding template. And of course, the roles will become matchpoint roles and also be connected to corresponding permissions on the whole site. So that said, we have already done the third point, because you decide on each object from the real world with which object you want to represent it in SharePoint. The importance here is maybe not so much which object you take. Of course, there are better ones and worse ones, but that you do it in the same way every time you build such an application. This will let you even go further than just building one application, and it will let you, for example, do analysis across sites of various types, because you don't have the same objects everywhere representing, for example, documents, inputs, outputs, or tasks, and so on. From here, you do the site provisioning template definition. And this is usually a normal task that you would also do if you don't have Matchpoint. Only with Matchpoint it becomes a little bit easier because if I go back to the slide I just created, I could also say I have now built this template, I want to save it as an XML, and I can use save site as provisioning template feature from Matchpoint, and then just save it in the central repository. From the moment I save this, it is available across the whole SharePoint form and can be used for site provisioning. Now, this is of course a little bit faster than writing an XML, also providing a solution package and deploy the solution and so on, how you would have to do it with your SharePoint out-of-the-box tools if you want to do it correctly. Of course, you can do things with SharePoint Designer, but this is, from our point of view, not a way to go in an enterprise environment. Okay, step 5 is you have to ask yourself what from this workspace now is important in a larger perspective. Which means when I enter my application, like we did in demo, I need some overview. So what view on this data do I need? Because from there, you also know what metadata you will need in your workspace. So for example, if I go back to the demo, we said that we would like to see a customer grouping here, or a possibility to sort our site by customer. Of course, this is then very easy to see that you need the information about the customer on every site if you want to do this. And what we experience is that if you ask someone who is not knowing how this all works technically, if you ask him, what do you want to see, you get much further and you get a much better answer than if you ask him directly, what metadata do you need for your application, because he will not be able to give you the correct answer on this, or everybody would answer something else. But almost all people know what they need to work, what they have to see. So you could say we do it the other way around. We don't do it from a technical perspective, but we try to do it from a user perspective. Now, once you have defined the metadata, of course you can also define the metadata sources, and by this you can make sure that metadata that is already somewhere in your system environment, like it could be already in SharePoint, it could be in your ERP, it could be in another system. You don't necessarily want to manage this metadata again in your SharePoint application, but we want to reuse it. So in our case here, if I go into the management, you see that we have a lot of timer jobs with metadata importers. As you can see here, we have a lot of tag importers, and they come from various sources. So, for example, we import the customers from a SharePoint list. As you can see here, we have defined the customers list, where we just let a user manage the customers, and then we import it to the Matchpoint metadata management. You can do the same with terms, the term store. And if I go back one step here, you see that if I create such an importer, there are various ways of importing this. I can define an import, and then I can define various data sources. And you can also write your own data source to expand it. So this is the way how we believe we can improve metadata management in the bottom, because it is very important that you don't create a metadata management overhead in SharePoint itself, because usually you don't have the people to do this. No one would like to do this. And if there are categories like a customer or a product catalog that are very dynamic, it is also quite impossible to do it, because then you will have a redundancy between SharePoint and your CRM, for example, or your product information system. So, of course, if you don't have a source, you can manage the metadata directly in SharePoint. I think this should be clear. But the goal should be to minimize metadata management. So once you have defined the metadata and sources and everything, what remains are the provisioning process and the UI design. The provisioning process is also basically a Matchpoint configuration, where you define all these things like where is the site stored, where is how is the site generated, is it by cell-site provisioning, is the template already specified, or can the user choose it, how is the site title generated, what kind of URL do you generate, do you need a unique site idea, if yes, what format should it have, what content type does the site have, and so on. So you have a lot of parameters that help you a lot to make sure that all the sites are generated in exactly the same way, and that the user cannot make any mistakes. And on the other hand, of course, you can initialize all the parameters that you need for governance, like the governance metadata or the content targeting metadata. And of course, UI design is still very important. I have not done it, but I think you're all kind of technical people and you understand still how this application works. But from an end user's perspective, I think it is very, very important that also in the collaboration area, the UI design should be taken care of. We see many customers doing this when they build SharePoint intranet. They do very nice design and they do collaboration, and it looks like pure old SharePoint again, and the users, of course, they prefer to have a nice design as well. Interestingly enough, I just did an analysis of other collaboration tools that are not relying on SharePoint, like for example Jive. They have very similar concepts, and their design is not a lot better than SharePoint design. So, a sample application could consist of the following components: the overview page that you have seen also in my little example. Then the site template, as I explained. The site template also contains the roles of the participants who work in the site, and that's another important concept that Matchpoint provides. It's the possibility to define global roles ad hoc, which means if I create a site template, I just add the roles I need, and then they will be globally provided. So that means that, for example, for a project site, I define a project manager and a member and the steering committee. And for a team site, I define a team leader and the team members. And if I then go and look what roles do I have in total, for example, in search, I can search for all these roles because they are globally provided. And that happens in the background. And based on the roles, you manage the permission groups. That means that if your site is not a site, but a site collection, you don't have to bother anymore on how to manage all the different groups in each site collections, because the roles will take care of it. They will feed the groups, and if you add a new user to one of your sites by giving him a role, you automatically get the recognition. And of course, they will also be revoked if you revoke the role from the user. So there is the creation form. We have seen one creation form when we created the site. It can be a very simple one. The form can also be integrated directly in the overview. It doesn't have to be a pop-up window. You have to define the provisioning process. The provisioning process will reference the site template, and if you run it, you will create different sites. And the sites themselves, they are pure normal SharePoint sites. Of course, there is a Matchpoint feature on it, but that's everything. That's where SharePoint functionality is used, because we feel that in this area there's nothing to add. It works perfectly well. Of course, all these information are indexed, and what is interesting is that you have seen this. We can use a feedback loop from the index to create the overview. So if you have no sites in the beginning, your overview will be empty and will be filled automatically once the sites are generated. And of course, since we are using the index, we can also very easily provide this information to another SharePoint application like your intranet. A little bit in more detail, you see what kind of objects are defined on each of these elements. You will receive these slides, you will be able to download them. So out of time reasons, I will skip this part because it's something that I have mentioned before as well. It just lists the specific object. So as you might have noticed, there are a lot of samples that can be implemented like this. In the real world, you have communities, team rooms, contracts, training, incidents, products, support cases, legal cases, patients, medical cases, you name it. It's always the same principle. And you can take a whole configuration set and copy it to create a new case, for example. And that's where Matchpoint gets really efficient, because in a specific company, you will certainly have not only one case, but many cases in the long run. Now, as a wrap-up, I would like just to mention the major benefits to architecture of this approach. and also to show you where you can improve your platform compared to SharePoint out of the box. And of course, by this, reduce a lot of custom development needs and be much more agile and much more sustainable with Matchpoint-based solutions. So the first point is information integration. I have shown this in the beginning, that also multiple collaboration applications, since they are constructed in exactly the same way, can be used to work together. So, for example, if you define the source for the customer metadata, this metadata is of course not only used in one application, it will be exactly the same source, exactly the same customers in all your applications. And that's why this is so important to be sure that you always translate your business objects from the real world into the same SharePoint object. So we make sure this will work. There is also a loose coupling between collaboration, social, and intranet applications. And the coupling is in fact done by search, by the font index. And we are very pleased that Microsoft finally has a very robust index that is standard in SharePoint and does not have to be added as an extra, because the index is something we are relying on a lot on this approach. And this makes life a lot easier for us and for everyone using this approach. So the third aspect is information integration from other systems. Usually you only have part of the information in SharePoint, and if you want to cover the whole process, you need more information. And Matchpoint provides data integration tools to it also on a configuration level. The platform performance is, of course, a very important aspect. Since we are based on search, we don't have any limit anymore regarding the physical structure of the platform. If you remember back in time when you used camel query to do aggregation, we're always limited to a very small amount of sites, for example, to do an aggregation because it got very slow when you went beyond certain borders. This is not the case with the search-based approach. Also, you can forget about the site directory because also the site directory is search-based with Matchpoint, and all aspects that are related to the sites. Then, regarding the scalability, we can build a cross-application distributed physical structure, which means that the structure you choose to manage your site and site collection doesn't matter anymore, because you're completely independent from a user perspective, because you don't have to worry about how will the user be able to find even the site when I do the architectural design from a pure scalability point of view, where, for example, sites are distributed in a round-robin database cluster. So the last point is also security. With the governance tools Matchpoint provides, we can make sure that all workspace information and the content that is inside these workspaces has a proper lifecycle management that is controlled by IT. Even though the workspaces themselves and the creation of the workspace can be controlled purely by the user. The access management is really role-based, so the user does not have to translate his business role into permissions himself, but it will be made by Matchpoint, so the user can really just work with business roles. And of course, last but not least, we have improved application and workspace separation. Since we are mainly using site collection as the container, and since SharePoint on this level provides more separation possibilities, and also other parameters can be controlled, like, for example, the quota can be controlled better than if you just rely on north, side, or west. Okay, I have slightly used more time than I intended to do. But I hope you still have a couple of minutes for questions, if you have any questions. so please feel free to use the chat if you have questions regarding what I explained or regarding Matchpoint in general. Either you're typing very slowly, or you have a very long question, or you have no questions. If your questions come later, of course, you are very welcome to contact me directly by email. And also the information I provided will be able for download on our website. And the video, the recording of the session will also be available through a link on our website, I think, in a couple of days. So I would like to thank you for participating. I hope the topic was interesting for you and showed you some new ideas on how you could provide collaboration applications in the enterprise with SharePoint and Matchpoint. And yes, as I said, feel free to contact me and have a nice evening. Thank you and goodbye.